Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I slept with another man today. Dan Jenkins stopped halfway to get a Michelob from the refrigerator and looked back at Caroline, his charming 29-year-old wife. She was standing in the doorway between the study and the kitchen. He had just returned home from work and allowed himself one beer, which helped him relax after a hard day spent on insurance. He shook his head and looked at her again, wondering what she had actually said. The Freudian mistake was understandable given what he had been through over the past 2.5 years, of which he had been married to Caroline for a year and a half, and he was worried that it was still happening. He should have recovered by now. He forced himself to smile at her. She didn't smile back. As he did every day, he thanked God for bringing her into his life. She looked like a Dresden doll come to life. Long blonde hair, pink cheeks, red lips, and blue eyes. Slender up and down, with enough curves to make her work outfit of blouse and trousers look beautiful. Not as revealing curves as 34-year-old Holly possessed, but it was good that Caroline in this sense, as in all others, was different from his cheating ex-wife, whom he still prayed every night that she would die of some terrible debilitating disease. Jesus, honey, for a minute I thought you said that. I wasn't listening. What did you say? She looked at him with such a sad and cold expression that his hand holding the beer trembled. I said that I slept with another man today, Frank Miller from the office. You know, he works in the field of information technology. You met him at a party last month. Big blonde guy. Dan opened and closed his mouth. He was struck by the silly thought that he must look like a fish with that mouth opening and closing. The words wouldn't come out. She didn't move. She could be a real porcelain doll. In case you didn't understand, Dan, I made love to him. I went to a motel and made love to him for half a day. He carefully placed the Michelob on the kitchen table. A crazy thought occurred to him that he should be careful to wipe it off if it spilled. What are you? You're like... Finally, he mastered his mouth. Don't even joke like that, Caroline. How the hell could you? It wouldn't be funny even if... If anything, her expression became even sadder, but her words were just cold. Even if your bitch wife Holly hadn't cheated on you with her big boyfriend and kicked you out of the house. Isn't that what you were going to say, Dan? It hurts, doesn't it? But it happened again. He couldn't breathe. It was impossible. He was asleep and could wake up at any minute to find Caroline breathing softly next to him. He would reach out and kiss her and thank God that she had come to save his life after Holly had done everything possible to destroy it. He blinked furiously, trying not to cry from embarrassment. He had shed enough tears as it was when Holly told him that she had fallen in love with another man and was going to marry him. It was only later that he found out that she had been cheating on him for years and had fallen in love with her last boyfriend. Why are you doing this, Caroline? I don't believe you. You didn't do it. It's not in your nature to be such a bitch. We've only been married for a year and a half, but I know you better. She shook her head. I'm sorry, Dan, it's true, but you haven't asked me why yet? Why did I go to the motel with Frank? Frank liked it and wants to do it again. Dan leaned back against the counter and for a moment felt the world spin around him. He made it to a chair at the kitchen table before he fell. He thought she was joking, but the cold words told him she was telling the truth. Why the hell was that his only thought? Why again? Why me? Finally, he was able to squeeze out the words. Okay, you pathetic fool, I'll bite you. Why? Why would you do that to someone who loves you? I would give my life for you. Our children love you, have loved you since we started dating. I understand Holly. She was a pathetic, cheating fool. But you, am I really that bad in bed? For the first time since she had spoken, Caroline walked up to him and stopped less than a foot away. She reached out and cupped his face, strangely comforting. No, you're not that bad in bed. I haven't had many men, but from my own experience, you're damn good. And Frank wasn't any bigger than you, maybe a little wider, but I didn't take a ruler to compare you. Dan, the reason I cheated on you and used Frank is because I have to get used to making love to other men again. Even though she spoke English, she could speak Mandarin Chinese. He didn't understand at all what she was talking about. He put his hand over hers. The feeling of his flesh next to hers was the only thing that mattered in this world. What the hell does that mean? I'm filing for divorce, Dan. I'm leaving you today. I'm going to pack my things, most of them anyway, tonight and go to my mom's. And since we're not going to be together and since I have to start a new life, I've decided that I'm going to make love to another man. Oh, and I wanted to hurt you as much as I possibly could. And I knew that fucking Frank would hurt you more than anything else I could do. He felt the same as the day he entered his previous house. And Holly, instead of greeting him with a kiss, told him that she had fallen in love with the old guy and wanted him to move out that night. She was divorcing him. But even Holly, no matter how much of a bitch she was, didn't try to hurt him, as did her loving replacement, whom he married to try to fill the void in his heart left by Holly. Now Caroline was tearing out what was left of his heart. And the worst part was that he still didn't know why. He felt a great weariness come over him. It was an attempt to squeeze out the words. All he wanted to do was climb up and collapse. It was good that today was a weekday and the kids were with Holly. He knew he should be angry, furious, and wanting to kill the beautiful fool standing in front of him. But it was as if Holly's first betrayal had stolen all the anger out of him. All he has left is sadness. I think I know the rules. It must have been an old boyfriend that you met again. Or did you find some new boyfriend and decide that you made a mistake by marrying a 37-year-old criminal like me? Who are you in love with now? In you. It's always been you ever since the day you came to my office. Until that moment, I had never believed in love at first sight. He took her hand and took it away from his face. Let me clarify. You're in love with me. You were in love. And you're going to a motel to make love to some guy because you're going to divorce me and you want to hurt me. What is it about this painting that I don't understand? I still love you. I chose Frank to make love because every girl at work says he's a stud and a real lover. But even though I enjoyed it and enjoyed the way he enjoyed me, he never rang my bell. I couldn't understand it. With you and me, well, you know how it is. I had to pretend a couple of times to avoid hurting his feelings. I guess I love you so much that I just can't push the buttons anymore. He stared at her. It was hard enough to believe her words, to believe that she had made love to another man. Something was wrong here. But, she said, I decided it didn't matter. I'll make love to Frank or someone else over and over again, and eventually I'll stop loving you and respond to them the same way I respond to you. Maybe not as wild as I was with you because I don't think I'll ever love someone the way I loved you again. But I can live my life. He grabbed her small, slender hands in his and pulled her down until she knelt in front of him and slightly raised her head to look into his eyes. Caroline, for God's sake, think about it. I don't understand. Do you want to divorce me? I've given you over a year, Dan. I tried my best, but I can't do it anymore. I can't live with a cheater. He couldn't believe his ears, and he almost wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Did she ruin their marriage by using another guy because she thought he was cheating on her? He wanted to grab her and pound some common sense into that pretty, completely stupid head. My God, do you really think I'm cheating on you? Caroline, I haven't touched a woman since the day we met. I admit I had a bed with a couple of women after Holly dumped me. But it ended the day we met. There has never been anyone but you. How could you even think that? Did someone lie to you about me? She took his hands away and stood up. Now she was looking down at him, and even though he knew he was innocent, he felt like a piece of shit under someone's shoe. I didn't say you were sleeping with anyone, Dan. You're in love with someone else, and that's the same as cheating. You promised me that you would love and cherish only me, and you lied. You're in love with someone else every minute of our marriage. He had a terrible feeling that he knew where everything was going. Caroline was wrong, but how could he make her believe him? Nothing like that. She slapped him in the face, and the shock alone was enough to send him flying off the chair and onto the floor. Caroline was not the kind of woman to slap, a slap in the face with an open palm, behind which there is power, the power of passion, the power of anger. Don't you dare lie to me, Dan. Do me a favor, at least be honest with me. You ruined my life. You tricked me into marrying you. You made me fall in love with you. You probably ruined me for other men, but don't keep lying on top of all the shit you've done to me. I don't love her anymore, Caroline. I don't. You have to believe me. No, do you know that you talk in your sleep? No, you know that. You cried for her, begged her to come back to you. You bastard. You know how much it hurt me. She took a deep breath. All my friends, all of them, and my mother told me not to marry you. They said you were devastated by the divorce and Holly was cheating on you. They told me I was a ricochet, that you love her, as evidenced by the fact that you fought like a cat with a dog for everything. You were more interested in trying to hurt her than taking care of your own children and living with me. They said you'd either go back to her if she bent your little finger, or you'd realize you didn't love me and move on to someone else after you'd had time to heal. But I was stupid and told myself that my love could change you, heal you, bring you to me, and I was ready to wait until you stopped loving her. I've been waiting for over a year, Dan, but you're still talking in your sleep, and I still see your face when her name is mentioned. Damn it, Caroline, she hurt me more than anyone. She ripped out my heart. She is the mother of my children. Of course, I have feelings for her. We have been married for over 10 years, but I don't love her. You have to believe me. I don't believe it. I've been watching you for a whole year, Dan. You're a man in love with another woman. I did everything I could, but I lost, and she won. I hope that someday you and she will be together again, because I can't imagine that you would ever be happy with anyone else. She came out of the kitchen. He caught her at the entrance to what was their bedroom and grabbed her by the shoulders from behind. Do you want me to get down on my knees and beg? I will. I'll do anything, Caroline. Something. I should hate you for making love to another man, but I forgive you. What do you want? Do you want us to move to another city? Another state? What can I do? She jerked and he loosened his grip. You can let me go and leave. Let me get my stuff and get out of here. Our marriage was a mistake. He watched her leave and all he could say was, don't go, don't go. After a while, he went down to the office, took a bottle of Dewer, filled a glass, and began to work steadily to get shit. He heard her leave through the front door, but he didn't even try to get up. Now that she was no longer around, he sat in front of the dark TV, drinking and crying until the night was gone. He didn't wake up the next day until 11 in the morning, but since he had his own insurance agency and staff, he didn't have to rush to work. After a while, he decided to go to hell and drove to Jacksonville Beach, about 20 miles from his home in Jacksonville, Florida. He went out to the beach, leaving his shoes and socks in the car, and watched seagulls flying overhead and a few stubborn northern tourists sunbathing in the cold November air of an autumn Florida day. He could have tried to figure out how to get out of the box he was in, but he didn't think there was a way out. At first, his marriage of 10 years collapsed in one day when he discovered that he was just a meal ticket for a cheater who was the mother of his 2 beloved children. He came to his senses after this fiasco and found another woman he loved, and now she went and used a stranger and was preparing to divorce him for loving his ex-wife. How do you prove that you don't love? He thought. Would praying that she would die a horrible death every night, even if it could be proved, prove it? He wasn't a psychiatrist, but he was smart enough to realize that the reason he hated Holly so much was because he really loved her. The pain of her betrayal was not as vivid as before, but if he thought about it, he felt a heart attack. But he loved Caroline. He knew that too. It's possible to love 2 women at the same time, isn't it? The next night, Wednesday, he called Caroline at home, and she said she didn't want to talk to him. He called her at work on Thursday, and she hung up. He drove past her office at closing time and saw her come out with a big blonde man, who must be Frank, and talking to him on the way to his car. But to his relief, they didn't touch or kiss, and when he followed her as stealthily as he could, she drove straight to her mother's house in a mobile home park on the west side of the city. He called her at work on Friday and she told him to stop calling her. I'm sorry, baby, but I'm going crazy. I do not know what to do. I'm losing the woman I love more than anything in the world, whether you believe it or not. Please tell me there's something I can do to stop this. I need you. I'm still mad at you, Dan, I have to tell you. But I've come up with something. I'm not going to tell you that I won't file for divorce, but there's something you can do that will make me think about giving us a second chance. Just tell me, whatever it is, I'll do it. I don't know if you'll be so happy when you hear that. I'll come to us tonight. Can we go out to dinner and talk about it? No, it's not a date. I want to talk to you, and then I'm going home. And go out with Frank again? Didn't you have enough the first time? He cursed himself the minute the words left his lips. It wasn't what he wanted to say, but he was so jealous and angry that he couldn't stop. No, I'm going for a walk with my mom and 2 of her friends. They always have dinner on a Friday night. And Dan, I'm not going to date Frank anymore. I told him it was only once and he was fine. I'm not going to date anyone until our divorce is final. Me. I shouldn't have done that. I knew that. But I was mad as hell at you. I just wanted to hurt you. But it was wrong. There will be no other man until I become a free woman. And even if we get divorced, I'll always regret doing this to you. He dialed Holly's familiar number, which he now hated. He forced himself to speak politely to this fool who had burned his life. Me. I'm really sorry, Holly. I know I have to pick up the kids at 6 p.m. for the weekend, but something happened. It's important. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked. Do you mind if I pick up the kids tomorrow morning? Yes, I object, Bill and I, but it doesn't matter. When will you pick them up? How about 9 a.m.? Okay, I'll cook them. Thanks. She hung up the phone without saying another word. After hanging up, he shook his head. She's been acting almost like a human lately. It was weird. In the first year after they broke up, they didn't exchange a single decent word. It was an endless struggle to see who could pull the other's chain. Of course, he knew that it was mostly his fault. She had their house, their children, and most of their friends. All he had was the pain and embarrassment of being an abandoned idiot who never saw this coming. But in the year since she remarried, that guy Bill, whom he had never heard of, she had almost turned into a decent person. Of course, she disappeared for almost 6 months. Bill brought and picked up the children during court-appointed visits. Bill, with whom he talked. For some reason, she almost completely avoided him. However, she was mostly decent now, but despite the changes, he was still as careful with her as with a spitting cobra. Although Caroline said it wasn't a date, he made spaghetti carbonara from scratch, which she loved. And he bought a nice white Asti because she loved it too. He felt like a high school student preparing for a first date. He vacuumed the office and polished the kitchen counter. He wanted everything to be as good as possible. If this was the last time he spent time with Caroline at their house, he wanted everything to be as good as possible. At 7 o'clock sharp, he heard her 2005 Saturn pull into the driveway. He cooked spaghetti and put them on the dining table along with wine, good dishes, and cutlery. He lit 2 candles at both ends of the room and took a deep breath of the fragrant air, and he prayed for a miracle. There was a knock on the door, and something he didn't even know was fragile shattered inside him at the sound. A stranger knocked on the door, not that the woman returned to talk to her husband after a short separation. He opened it and reveled in the sight of her. She was wearing a casual blue pullover to protect her from the November cold. "Hi," he said, smiling and peering into her face, trying to figure out why she was here. "Hi, Dan." She went inside and sniffed the air. "Candles and carbonara. You didn't miss anything, did you?" He shrugged and grinned. "I'm sorry, but I had to try. Even if it's not a date, could you have a glass of wine and some carbonara?" Just 2 people ate a little and drank a glass of wine. There are no obligations. The slight smile faded from her face and she shook her head. "No, I'm not staying. I came here to talk and then I'm leaving. I really don't think it's going to do any good, but I have to try. I don't want to divorce you. I don't want to try to forget you. But to be honest, I don't think you can do what I ask you to do. Whatever it is, I will do it. If you give us one chance. If I didn't love you as much as I should have, then I will. I'm going to spend the rest of my life catching up on the last year." I didn't know what I was saying in my sleep, and I swear to God I had no idea I was shouting her name in bed. But you can't just take 10 years of loving someone out of your life. No one can. It doesn't mean that I don't love you. She sat down on the sofa in the living room and looked at him. "Oh, I know you love me, Dan. I've never doubted it. I just know that you don't love me enough. Sooner or later our marriage will end while there are 3 people in our bed and 2 women in your heart. The longer I wait to leave you, the more painful it will be for me. And I'm not doing you any favors. You'll either go back to Holly if she ever realizes what an idiot she was, or you'll find someone new, someone who won't tarnish your memories of living with Holly, and you can love her without any reservations. You're so wrong." "Maybe, but that's how I feel, and there's only one way to believe that you can forget her and start a new life with me." "Anything, just name it and I'll do it." She looked into his eyes and said, "Then go to her and forgive her. Forgive her, and make it true when you say you forgive her, and then you'll come back and convince me that you've let go of all the hate and pain you feel for her. Then I'll think about coming back to you." He stared at her, stunned. Of all the things he could have expected to hear from her. "Of course, I'll call her and talk to her. It won't be easy, but I want you to meet her face to face and tell her that you forgive her for cheating on you and making love to other men, taking your house and your children and breaking your heart. And it can't just be words. I'll find out when you come back to me. You have to change your attitude, Dan, or we won't have a chance ever." He just stared at her until she got up and then walked past him, opened the door and walked out of his life. He stood there for about 10 minutes before he entered the kitchen and started eating carbonara without tasting it. He had to forgive the woman he loved blindly. He had to forgive a woman who made love to other men while married to him before meeting the man she fell in love with. He had to forgive a woman who had traded 10 years of intimate, casual, and familiar nights for a new life with a stranger. He had to forgive the woman who ruined his life and didn't even bother to tell him why he wasn't good enough for her, made him wonder every night what was wrong with him, that all this love wasn't enough to keep her. What was missing? What was missing in it? Why didn't Caroline just ask him to fly by flapping his wings? He would have just as much chance of doing both. He struggled with it all weekend, taking 7-year-old Bob and almost 9-year-old Becky to the movies and bowling because they both had just discovered the game, thanks to Bill's love of the game. He winced when they first talked about Holly's new husband and his interests. But kids are good at reading people, and they seemed to really like this guy, so he could put up with catering to Bill's interests, and he struggled with it for the next week after they left for home. He couldn't bring himself to dial Holly's number, and when he picked up the kids that Saturday, he couldn't even look her in the eye. A week turned into 2 weeks, and he had children again. He wasn't sure why she had turned into an almost human being, but all the decent things she had done seemed to have happened since she met and married this guy Bill. Both children asked, both weekends, where Caroline was. She got into their hearts, and both weekends, when he told them that they had a little quarrel and that she was living with her mother for a while, became noticeably painful. They insisted on calling her, and she was ready to talk to them. Both children were crying but seemed to enjoy talking to her. Although they made it clear that she was ready to talk to him, he refused. He couldn't talk to her while her unfulfilled demand stood between them like an unexploded mine. Then a month passed, and one day, when he was sitting outside her office in downtown Jacksonville, he saw her go outside with blonde Frank. He saw the tall man bend down to kiss her on the lips. Dan saw her turn her face so that Frank's lips touched her cheek. As he watched this scene, there was another little death inside him. He had no doubt that she had been honest with him and had not made love to Frank anymore. But Frank was stalking her. There was no doubt about that. And little by little, he was claiming her. By the time it comes to divorce, she will fall into bed with him without any struggle. 5 weeks after their last conversation at 10 a.m., a man appeared at the office of Dan's insurance agency with an official package. After he handed it to Dan and said, "You've been served," he turned and left. Dan picked up the phone and told his staff that he would be gone for the rest of the day. He stopped in the dark near what used to be his house and went to the door. Although he was annoyed that he had to knock to enter the house that he had bought and paid payments for 10 years and invested his own sweat in it, he knocked. Bill opened the door. His hair was closer to black than dark brown, and he wore glasses on a large aquiline nose, but otherwise he was so close to Dan in appearance that he could pass for a brother. "Dan," he said calmly, "I need to see Holly." A moment later, Holly was standing slightly behind and to the side of her new husband. Dan realized that she had automatically taken Bill's hand. He didn't want to, but looking at her hit him in the stomach as hard as ever. It was a real storm of passion and love, and for the life of him, he couldn't understand how it all collapsed and burned down. "What do you want, Dan?" "I need to talk to you, Holly. If it's about alimony or dating children, you need to either contact lawyers or talk on the phone. We don't. It's not about the kids. I need to talk to you face to face. Now." Something in his tone made Bill take another step between them, and Holly stepped back. Bill held up his hand, palm up, as if to stop Dan as he approached his wife. "This is not the place, buddy. This is our home. If there's something you care about, let the lawyers do their thing." Dan just stood there and stared at the man who looked so much like him until the man dropped his hand and looked at him as if trying to read his mind. Holly stared at him with an expression that Dan couldn't understand. He hoped it might be some trace of guilt and shame. "Don't raise your fur. I'm not here for trouble. I just need to talk to my ex-wife for a few minutes," Holly asked, shifting from foot to foot as if nervous, which was probably true. It was the most they had said to each other without shouting in the last year and a half. "Not here, Holly. I need to talk to you alone, somewhere else." Holly and her husband exchanged glances. Dan didn't need to be a telepath to know what they were thinking. "No offense, Bill, but this is personal between me and the woman who was once my wife. It's none of your business, and I want to do it somewhere else, not here. This place has too many memories. Look, we got divorced almost 2 years ago. If I was going to hurt her, it would be when I hated her to the core, or at least when I hated her a lot more." The pair exchanged another glance, and he saw Holly shake her head negatively. "Holly, you know I'm not going to hurt you. We were married for 10 years. I am the father of your children. I loved you so much that it almost destroyed me when I lost you. Don't 10 years give me the right to 30 minutes of your time?" She looked at her husband, and Bill just stared at the floor. It was obvious that he was giving her the decision. She put her hands together and, without looking him straight in the eye, said, "We are everything. Everything has finally settled down. The children got used to life in 2 new families. You seem to be happy with—" Caroline. Why stir it up? Dan crossed the threshold of a house that would never belong to him again. This time she didn't back down, but Bill seemed to take a step to the side, so there was nothing between them. Finally, she looked into his eyes, and he thought that for the first time in 2 years, they really looked at each other. "I'm not going to stir anything up, Holly. I'm not going to beg you to come back or call you names. I just need to talk to you. Tonight. It can't wait. I'll explain, but I want to do it when there are only 2 of us. For God's sake, how could you do what you did to me? Take my children, destroy me, and not give me a few minutes?" Then he turned to Bill. "Holly knows me. She knows I won't do anything to her. She is the mother of my children. I just want to talk to her, at the Shawnee a few blocks away. We'll have our own conversation, but there will be people around if you're worried." They took a few steps back and began talking quietly. Finally, she came back and stood in front of him, so damn beautiful that it hurt Dan to look at her. "All right, Dan, go there. I'll be there in a few minutes. I promise." For a split second, he was seized with an unbearable desire to laugh and ask if this promise meant as much to her as the promises she had made 10 years ago to love and cherish him. But he stopped himself. Nothing good would come of it, and if he insulted her, it might take away his last chance to get Caroline back. He left without saying another word. He was waiting at a table at the back of the restaurant when she came in 30 minutes later. She seemed to slow down as she approached him, and he could tell that she didn't want to be near him. Well, to hell with it, he thought. He's going to be damn uncomfortable, so why should she be comfortable? She hesitated for a moment, then sat down opposite him. They were the only people in 4 booths in any direction. It was already 7:30 p.m. on a cold November night. They probably won't have too much to do at this time of night. A fat waitress with a wrinkled face approached their table, visibly wincing every time her feet touched the floor. "It's a bad night for a walk," she said. "What can I do for you guys?" "Coffee for me." "To you?" Holly shook her head. "Give her coffee with cream and sugar. It'll keep you warm. You still take it that way, don't you, honey?" He couldn't help but say the last word, remembering all the nights they'd come to places like this, when he knew what would be inside her before the night was over. And it hit him hard again. Why the hell did she leave him? Annoyance flashed across her face, but she blinked away the moisture and said, "Do you still remember that?" "I remember a lot, Holly. There are many things I would like to forget, but I can't." She looked at the waitress and said, "And a piece of cherry pie." He wanted to smile, but the memory hit him in the stomach again. She loved the cherry pie they served at Shawnee's, and he never objected to it. When the waitress left, she looked at the table for a minute, then met his gaze and said, "What was so important was that we had to meet like this. To talk. I can't be away for more than 30 minutes, otherwise Bill will come looking for me. Does this have anything to do with Caroline? The children told me that you live separately." He didn't realize he was going to say it until he heard her, and then he heard his own voice. "Today I was handed the divorce papers." She might have been a really great actress, but it seemed to him that Holly looked genuinely sad. "Oh my God, Dan, I'm so sorry. The children love her very much, and they said that you guys seem very close. What happened?" "Dan, I'm truly sorry, but what does this have to do with me? Why did we need to meet so urgently? She left because of you." She just stared at him as if she didn't understand his words. "What? How? She doesn't think that we—" "She told me that I love you and that our marriage is a sham. This is crazy." "No," he said slowly, and finally, after looking at her, he relaxed his guard. "She was right. I've just never been honest enough to admit it." She shook her head as if unwilling to admit the truth and said slowly, "I didn't know. You should have known that. You can't hate someone as much as I hate you if you don't love them that much. And I still love you, just like the day I found out you were making love to that asshole." He took a deep breath. He had to do it before his nerves gave out and he broke down and ran away. "I don't want to love you. I want to love Caroline. But you're still there, crowding out any other woman I could love. I want you to leave my heart. I want to be free." The sadness on her face seemed to only grow as his words reached her. "She told me what I had to do to save our marriage, and that's why I'm here." "What? Why?" "I'm here to forgive you, Holly." She looked at him as if he was speaking in some foreign language. "What?" "I'm here to forgive you." She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. "I know what you've done, but I'm tired of hating you and loving you. You betrayed me, ruined my life, and threw away my love for you like yesterday's trash. I want to think you're a monster, but I know you're not. Today I had a lot of time to think, to remember. You love children too much to be a real monster. I never thought you were completely evil. That's why you hurt me so much. If you were just a rotten fool and I made a terrible mistake marrying you, I might forget you." Now there was a distinct mist in her eyes. "But you are a decent person, except for your attitude towards me. You are a good daughter, a good mother, a good friend. The people at your real estate agency love you. I'm the only person you've ever treated like shit. I've never been able to figure it out, and I still don't know. But you must have had some good reason for what you did. Maybe I've never been good enough in bed to keep you at home. I didn't think so, but who knows? Damn, there's nothing unusual about that. If you weren't mine, if I didn't love you so much, I could accept that marriages are falling apart. People fell out of love with each other. It's just different when it happens to you." The waitress came to the end of his words and seemed confused by what she heard. She left 2 coffees and a pie and hurried away. He took a sip of coffee. He concentrated for a few more seconds, then looked at her. There were tears in her eyes, but she didn't say a word. "Anyway, Holly, I've decided to let go of the hate. We will never be friends, but I will try to move on and forget you. I will always be by your side when it comes to children. And God, how hard it is. I hope that this guy, your new husband Bill, I hope that he can give you what I couldn't." It was almost over and he was alive. He wasn't sure if his heart wouldn't stop beating at some point, but he survived. He took a deep breath, got up and left the booth. "That's all, Holly. I just wanted to tell you that. Have a happy life." Before he could leave, she put her hand on his and it stopped him as if he had been tasered. It was the first touch in almost 2 years. "Sit down, Dan." He was torn. Part of him wanted to run away from her, and the other half wanted to jump on her and rip off her clothes. The tears had stopped, but she looked as if she had returned from the funeral of her closest friend. "I was listening to you. Will you listen to me? I have to tell you something, and it will cause you even more pain than you've already received. But you deserve the truth, and I hope it helps you move on." He couldn't help but think, Jesus Christ, you're going to hurt me even more than you already have. Is it even possible? But he slipped back into the booth. He saw something on her face that he hadn't seen on the day she told him she was kicking him out, or in the days that followed. He couldn't tell what it was, but something was moving under that strong, calm exterior. "We never talked about it, but I should have. It wasn't good to leave things as they were, but it was part of our whole problem." He had no idea what she was talking about or what was going to happen next, but he knew that nothing good would come of it. She looked like she was taking deep breaths to gather her strength and plant the verbal bomb she was about to throw at him. Finally, she said it. "You say you loved me and you still love me. Here's the thing. I've never loved you. Like that." Somehow she managed to look him in the eye. Never? He couldn't believe his ears. Even knowing what he now knew, he couldn't bring himself to believe it. Even at the very beginning? Now she finally looked away and stared at the table for a minute, but eventually she looked up at him again. "I liked you. I really liked you. You remember, I was dating Dave and Bob when you appeared in the frame, when we met at that Chamber of Commerce that Saturday night." He remembered. He was 26 years old. He worked at another insurance agency until he gained the experience to open his own. He came close to getting married twice, but nothing came of it, and they broke up before things got too serious. He was 26 years old, horny, and just wanted to see if he could sleep with someone when he agreed to go to the Chamber of Commerce party at the Big Bell South Tower in downtown Jacksonville that Saturday night. He was not bad looking, and he was very lucky in nightclubs, so he decided that he might get lucky that night. But he never expected to see the vision that met his gaze while standing with a group of other women near the cash register bar. She was wearing something transparent and light blue, and even through the fabric he could see that she was incredibly built. She wasn't too tall or too short, just right. a blonde with the good looks of a Californian surfer and a fantastic body. He caught the attention of the bartender, one of those college students who earn money on the side at such events. Dan took out a $1.50 bill and put it in the guy's hand. "It's yours if you tell me or find out what the blonde in blue drinks." The guy looked at the counter and smiled. "A good man with taste. If I wasn't working, I would have tried to do it myself. I didn't wait on her, but let me ask a couple of guys." He came back a minute later and said, "Rum and Coca-Cola with 1 cherry." Howie said he heard her say that she would like to have a bunch of cherries, but they all go up her ass. Dan grinned and handed him another $1.20. "I noticed that your drink is dying," he said, standing in front of the blonde and between her and her 2 girlfriends, who fell silent for a minute and scanned the crowd for guys. She looked at him in surprise, and then saw the glass he was holding out to her. There was a blank expression on her face, and then a slow, delicious smile appeared. A dozen cherries were swaying in the dark liquid. "I'm sorry, but I thought it was worth finding out what you drink, and one of the bartenders told me that you like cherries, but they all go up your ass." A smile flickered. She was clearly trying to fight it. "I'm sorry to say this, and I don't want to get personal, but with an ass like that, you can eat a whole bushel of these things and it won't hurt at all." She lowered her eyes and blushed for a moment, then raised them and began to frankly appraise him from head to toe, and for a second stopped at the bulge in his pants, which he simply could not lower. "You went to all this trouble doing detective work just to buy me a drink? Why am I worth all this effort?" "I hope someday I can show you how glad I am to see you," Dan said, seeing something in her eyes that told him he was going to get lucky very soon. He returned from the past with a painful feeling in his stomach. How can such a good thing turn into such a bad thing? I liked Bob, the insurance salesman I was dating, but I really loved Dave. Remember, I told you how close we were to getting married, and that I really loved him, but when he moved in with someone else, I was jealous. When I met you at that party, I was very excited. You were hot, and I loved the way we made love that first night after the party. I started dating you hot and hard to make Dave jealous. He became more and more attracted to the girl he was living with, and therefore you and I met more and more often, and the more we met, the more I liked you. You were sweet and kind. But then again, you know I've always loved making love. I was a hot cheater, and you've always liked that about me. So one day Dave called me and told me that he had fallen in love with her and was going to marry her. That's why I threw myself at you. It was fun. You treated me like a princess. No one has ever treated me like this. He married her a few months later. And then you remember the 2 weeks you had to spend in New York studying when you were preparing to open your own agency. So one day Dave unexpectedly called me and said that he had quarreled with Mary, the girl he married. In fact, it was a conflict because of me, and he came to my house. We ended up in bed. No excuses. You and I weren't married yet, but by that time we were already close. Anyway, that's what you thought, but honestly, to me, you were just a guy I was dating because my heart was broken. In short, I've been making love to Dave for the entire 2 weeks you've been gone. She met his gaze again. Then you came back, and Dave made up with Mary. I had no reason to talk about what happened because I didn't see that I had done anything wrong. And then, a month later, I found out that Becky was pregnant. When you found out about it, you said we should get married and you wouldn't take no for an answer, even though I tried to dissuade you. Remember, I tried to tell you that we don't need to get married. Having a child out of wedlock was no longer something terrible. But you were so excited and so happy. And Dave went back to Mary and told me that we were just having an affair, that Mary was the woman he was going to spend his whole life with. I didn't have a man I loved, and I could tell that you love me and you like the idea of having a child and starting a family. So I told myself that we would have a good life together, even if I didn't love you. Dan remembered those days and how happy he was to learn that this gorgeous woman who lit his bed every night would give birth to his child. The realization blossomed in his head like a nuclear bomb. He knew why she wouldn't look him in the eye. "Don't tell me! Don't fucking tell me!" When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "Yes, I checked on her after she was born. I never told you. I checked on Dave. He didn't want to do it, but I told him I'd sue him and ask for alimony for the next 18 years if he refused. But if he let me check on him, I'd never tell you, and you'd think you were the father. And Dave was her biological father." Dan jumped to his feet, slipped out of the booth, and tried to keep from hitting her. "You're a fool. You're a pathetic fool. I really thought I could forgive you after everything you've done. I told myself that there was nothing more you could do to hurt me, but I was so wrong. You took my daughter away from me, you damn fool. And I'm sure Bob isn't mine either. Damn you. He walked past her, shaking off her hands when she tried to grab him, and ignoring her calls to stop and listen to her. The cold night air was invigorating when he went outside. It was nice to be cold. He has lost his wife and children and is about to lose his new wife, and at almost 40 years old, he will find himself alone like never before in his life. He got into his Mustang and turned the key in the ignition, preparing to drive out of the parking lot. Only a glance in the rearview mirror stopped him from killing his ex-wife. She was standing behind the car with her arms crossed over her chest, as if provoking him to step back. He rolled down the driver's side window. "Get the hell away from my car, Holly. I swear to God, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to drive right at you if you don't move your ass." "I'm not moving. If you kill me, how are you even going to meet Bob and Becky?" He opened the door and moved towards her, not even having time to realize what he was doing, leaving the car idling in neutral. "If I have to, I'll knock you out and just throw your unconscious body somewhere far away." She flinched but didn't back down. "I know I hurt you, Dan, but I told you it would hurt. But trust me, come back with me and let me finish. I think you'll be glad you did it. At least I hope you do. No matter what, you have to let me finish. If you want your marriage to Caroline to be a success, you need to hear this. How the hell do you tell me that my children aren't mine, and then it's probably going to get worse, even though I can't imagine what could be worse to help me save my marriage?" He stopped in front of her and she reached out to take his hand. "Please." He followed her back to Shawnee's, feeling the nervous stares of the waitresses and the manager. He wondered if they had called the police. "It's okay, we had a bit of a fight. It's all over now." When they got back into the booth, she said so softly that no one could hear. "I said that Dave was Becky's biological father. You're her father. She doesn't know, and Dave doesn't know. No one knows except you, me, and Bill. No one will ever know again. And when you stop suffering, you'll realize that it doesn't matter. Do you love her less knowing?" He blinked and answered mechanically. "But is Bob mine?" "Yes. After we got married, I didn't have a bed with anyone else for years. You've been a wonderful husband, but..." "But what? What did I do wrong, Holly? I thought our life was wonderful. It seemed to me that you were trying to mess with my brain every time we fell into bed. Why did you need to look for a strange one?" She shook her head and reached for him again. He wanted to push her away, but this question had been gnawing at him from the inside for 2 years, and he was ready to put up with her touching if she ever told him the truth. "I was in real estate. I saw strange men every day. This meant that men molested me every day. You know I've always been catnip to guys. But some of these guys, I liked them. I really liked them. They reminded me of you. And don't tell me that if I'd been married at the party that night, you wouldn't have bothered me and done everything you could to use me for the rest of the night. I know you too well." "Okay, maybe I would have done that. I wasn't a saint. But why did you start?" She took a deep breath and then exhaled. "The truth? Please. Because I didn't love you. We had a marriage, but a marriage of convenience. You have 2 children that you love, and I have the same thing. I've always thought that you probably knock off a piece or two when you say you're at work. I knew you loved children, but I told myself that you felt the same way about me that I felt about you. And why was it wrong? Yes, didn't you listen? I didn't love you. Sleeping with a strange guy will not be betrayal or betrayal, because it will just be a good, pure pleasure. It wouldn't hurt me, and I was sure it wouldn't hurt you in the long run. But I didn't do anything anyway. After a while, I realized that I would never know what it was like to love a man again, at least not after Dave. I really didn't think you loved me that much, and I started to feel probably deprived. I knew that other wives, even our friends, loved their husbands. They joked with them, sometimes cheated on them, but loved them, and I didn't have that. And then one day, a guy I knew in college came into the real estate office. He was great. He started hitting on me, invited me to have lunch with him, and I agreed. And a few lunches later, he came to my office and said he wanted me to go to a motel with him after lunch, just for a few hours, just to scratch the itch that we've both been experiencing for years. I remember looking at him and being so excited that I was ready to scream. And then I looked at my desk and saw a picture of you with Becky and baby Bob on it. And then I realized that it was like looking at a picture of a roommate I lived with, a hot roommate, but just a guy I lived with. And for just a second, I hated you. I wasn't the one who wanted to get married. You practically forced me to do this. And now I was stuck with a guy I didn't really love, and even worse, I couldn't make love to someone else. This dreamy guy I'd wanted for years. It's all your damn fault. That day, I decided that if I didn't have a man I loved, then damn it, I'd have as much love as I wanted, and so I went to a motel with him, and we used each other half to death, and it was as good as I thought it would be. And when I got home, I thought I was going to feel guilty, but I didn't. That night we made love. That was great too. So I decided that I could really take my cake and eat it too. Life was good. Dan tried to understand her words and found that he understood something, even though he didn't like it. But it didn't bother you at all that you lied to me for so many years? Oh, of course, after a while it dawned on me. I knew I was lying to you, and I thought your pride would suffer if you found out that I slept with just anyone. I knew I was being selfish. I knew I was betraying you. I've known that since day one. But I knew that you love children, and if we break up, you will lose them. So it was convenient to be married to you. And I told myself that there are probably millions of marriages like ours in which people live well together, but go outside to get excited. So what happened? That's exactly what I expected, Dan. As long as it was a one-night stand, it wasn't hard to get away from these guys. And I was careful. Condoms. And I chose guys who I was sure weren't hounds. But then I started to really like some of these guys, and it turned into a long-term relationship. And I started to develop feelings for some of them. Finally, I met Sam, and we dated for almost a year before I realized that I loved him. I loved him the same way I loved Dave years ago, and I didn't want to live without him, and without love in my life. I knew you'd find out sooner or later. I've decided that the kindest thing I can do is tell you that I've met someone else and get a divorce. I never wanted you to find out about all my infidelities. She sat in silence, and he could only stare at her, trying to figure out what she had said to him. Who are you? What is it? He finally asked. How could I have lived for 10 years and not have the slightest idea who you are? Because I'm a very good actress, and you loved me and didn't want to see that I didn't feel the same way. But deep down, you must have felt that something lack, isn't it? In the end, I told myself that when you leave, you will find someone who can love you. He shook his head. You were such a good actress, and I was so in love with you. I never guessed. She bent her head to the table, and he couldn't believe it, but she was crying. Oh my God, I didn't want to hear that. I told myself that you should feel it. I never thought you didn't know that. In the end, he just shook his head in amazement and stood up. She answered his questions. He shouldn't have liked the answers, but she did. She reached out again to grab his hand. Please stay a little longer. How the hell could it be worse? After you left, you know that I moved Sam into the house, and it was fine for a few months. But he didn't really want children, even though he said they were fine. I saw it, and the passion between us cooled. 6 months later, we broke up, and I dated everyone until I met Bill. It was like with Dave. On the second night of our date, I realized that he was different. The funny thing is, Dan, and I know you won't see anything funny in this, is what everyone told me, and I see it now, that he could be your brother. He looks like you, about the same height, with slightly darker hair. He is serious, kind, calm, and loves me more than I deserve. When he saw your picture for the first time, he told me that he thought I was trying to replace you with a clone. Dan started to get up again, but she held his hand tightly. Just a little more. He sat down again. Okay, you love your new husband. I'm happy for you. But what does this have to do with me, with us? Wait a few more minutes. Well, I fell in love with Bill, but I knew I had to tell him about us, about you and me and what happened. I didn't want to tell him. I didn't want him to know what a liar I was. But he'd heard some stories about me from his friends, and I knew he'd find out the rest in time. I was afraid he'd think I was cheating on him. I knew I had to be honest with him. The children were at my parents' that evening, and I told him. I was afraid that he would hear my story and leave me. But I told him everything. While I was telling him, I looked at his face and my heart sank. I immediately understood what he was thinking. When I finished, he just sat and looked at me for a long, long time. In the end, he said, I'd kill you if you did this to me. How could you do this to your husband? And how can I trust you at all? I sat and tried to find the answer to this question, and I finally told him the truth. That I never loved you, not for a minute, but I loved him. I really love him. I wasn't trying not to love you. I just never really loved you. After I said that, he just stared at me for a few minutes. Then he stood up and said, "I have to get away from you for a while and think about it. I'll call you." I haven't heard from him for a week and I died inside. I knew he would never come back. And then one day he appeared at the door. He kissed me and said that he had thought about it for a long time and decided to leave. "But I couldn't," he said. "I was already in love with you. I know how Dan could love you so much for so long because I love you the same way. I think we are brothers not only in appearance." Then he told me that if we were going to stay together, I had to stop torturing you with the kids. Do you remember a year ago, I suddenly stopped all this Mickey Mouse nonsense and let you take them whenever you wanted, no matter how badly you talked to me or talked to them about me? It was Bill. He said, "I've fooled you enough already. I can't take your children away from you." She fell silent, and the two of them began to play with spoons. Dan drank the cooling coffee and tried to figure out what he was feeling. And when he came back, he asked me how I would feel if he pretended to love me and had affairs on the side. It killed me, and he said, "Try to put yourself in Dan's place." And for the first time, I realized what I had done to you. I stopped looking at everything from my side, only from my side, and thought about how you must have felt, what you went through. I haven't spoken to you in 6 months. Bill did everything necessary to transfer the children. I know you must have thought I was a real bitch, but the truth is, I couldn't look at you and know what I'd done to you. If I had said a word, I would have burst into tears and couldn't stop. I started having panic attacks, and the doctor recommended Valium to me. For 3 months, I walked around like a zombie, and Bill stood next to me. If he hadn't been there, I probably would have cut my wrists. I didn't think it was possible to feel pain and guilt and live like this. Her eyes were red from crying. Because to tell you the truth, I know you never deserved it, Dan. It was my fault, my selfishness. I should never have married you, and after I did that, the first time I started cheating, I should have asked you for a divorce. It would be much kinder that way. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "I told you all this so that you would understand the truth. You've never had a wife like you thought you had. You've never had the love you thought you had. It was all a lie or an illusion or a dream. It wasn't real. I'd say you've wasted 10 years of your life, but you have Becky and Bob. They're real, and they love you. If you ignore everything else I've said, remember that. I am their mother and I know their hearts. They love you more than anything in the world, including me. You may hate me for what I did to you, but remember that I gave you these two. It looks like you've finally found a woman who truly loves you. Don't leave her for someone, for something that never really existed." He was just sitting there when she stopped talking. He could hear the chatter in the kitchen in the distance, and outside, the sound of a lone car driving through the night. He felt like he was a million miles away from everything, and he was trying to figure out what he was feeling. It was the worst night of his life, worse than when Holly told him she loved another man and was leaving. In a way, it was even worse, because now he knew that he had never lost love. He just was comfortable. And yet, he looked at these beautiful features that had been the center of his life for so long and tried to figure out what had changed. It was like one of those optical illusions where a beautiful woman's face turns into a skull. She was Holly. She was still the beautiful woman he was courting, and yet, for some reason, this was not the case. He realized that it was like waking up from a dream. He could see the woman in front of him and remember the love they shared, or at least he thought they shared. But somehow the spell was broken. Her confession should have shocked him, should have destroyed the last shred of his manhood, but he realized that this was not the case. He remained the man he had always been. He loved this woman, enjoyed her body, and had 2 children with her. But somehow, there was no more pain. And then, as if the sun had risen in front of his eyes, he realized the truth. It wasn't something he did or didn't do. It was like an old song. You can't make someone love you if they don't want to. She never loved him. They were just 2 people living in the same house, making 2 children, making love. But she was right. They were roommates with privileges. He took a deep breath, and it was like inhaling without the pain of a broken rib scratching his heart for the first time in 2 years. He stood up, grabbed her by the arms, and pulled her out of the booth. He looked at her red lips and bent down to kiss her. For just a few seconds, he allowed himself to savor her taste for the last time. "Thank you, Holly," he said sincerely. He left the restaurant without looking back, and it was only when he turned around to leave the parking lot that he saw her through the window, hunched over the table. Her body shook, and only for a moment did he want to stop, go inside and comfort her. But he knew Bill would be there in a few minutes, and Bill was the one she needed right now. The next morning, he woke up after the best night's sleep in 2 years. At noon, as Caroline was getting ready for lunch, he entered the building housing the mortgage company where Caroline worked. He took the elevator to the 11th floor, where her office was located the last time he was here. Her office has not been moved. Passing by the secretary and her colleagues, he met several curious glances until he reached the door with the matte gilt letters, Caroline Jenkins. He entered without knocking and was not surprised to see Frank next to her. She was sitting at the table, and he was leaning over her. Their faces were close to each other. They were looking through some papers. They both looked up at the same time. Caroline paled, even though they weren't doing anything obviously wrong. Frank straightened to his full height, about 4 inches taller than Dan. He fidgeted as if he didn't know where to put his huge fists. "Dan, what are you?" Caroline began. "I'd like to talk to my wife." Frank glanced at Caroline, and when she made a slight movement of her head, he walked past Dan and out the door without saying a word. "I haven't heard from you in 5 weeks, and you show up in my office without a word. Yesterday I received the divorce papers. I told you what I was going to do. They shouldn't have been a surprise. I just never believed that you would actually do it. Just like I never really believed that you were using another man just to hurt me." She tried to glare at him, but eventually stared at the papers on her desk. "I've given you a choice," she said stubbornly. "After you used it, you left me no choice. You never told me that I was talking in my sleep. You never told me that I was screaming her name inside of you. I would have done anything to keep you, but you never gave me the opportunity." She lifted her chin and looked at him defiantly. "You're the one who ruined our marriage, not me. Don't try to blame it on me. And you put the nails in the coffin. But it doesn't matter anymore, Caroline. I understand that if it were the other way around, I would never have done to you what you did to me. I would leave you, but I wouldn't hurt you. It's funny, but in the last 24 hours, I've realized that Holly, that selfish fool, never really intended to hurt me. She did what she did for her own reasons, but not to hurt me. And you, my loving wife, did everything possible to destroy me." She smiled bitterly. "I should have guessed. You just couldn't do it. You still love her." Dan walked past her and stared out the corner window of her office. She had a magnificent view of the St. John's River, like a sparkling ribbon of mercury winding down below. "No, I did what you asked me to do, Caroline. I met her, we talked last night, and I forgave her. More importantly, I stopped loving her. I'm free now." She looked at him in disbelief. He realized that she had never thought that he would be able to do this. She had set an impossible goal for him. And as he realized this, he realized more than ever that the decision he had made was the right one. Just like I stopped loving you. It's amazing how easy it is to do this when you learn. As I said, I realized that I could never do to you what you did to me. And knowing that, I wondered why I fought so hard to keep a woman who could do it. He went to the door of her office and stopped for a second. "I will sign the documents today, and let everything go on as usual. We haven't been married long enough to have any assets to share, and we shouldn't have had any alimony anyway. I'll even talk to Holly so she can let you see the kids. They've fallen in love with you, and if they want to see you, I don't mind. As for you and me, I think you have everything. If you need anything else, come and use your key when I'm gone. I don't want to see you or talk to you anymore. Now you don't have to wait to start using Frank. I bless you. As for me, I'm going to start looking. I've fallen in love twice. I think I have the strength to do it again." Going down in the elevator after his second great love, he thought he expected it to hurt even more. But, as he said, overcoming Holly taught him a good lesson. You can't torture yourself forever for the shitty things other people have done to you. It was enough to punish himself for his own sins. The knocking on his door started at 7 in the evening. It had long been dark, and he wasn't expecting anyone else. So he let her knock until he heard the key click in the door, and remembered that he hadn't changed the locks. He heard footsteps approaching. "I called her and she told me what happened last night. You didn't trust me, did you?" She came up behind him and put her hands on his shoulders. "I didn't say you could touch me. But you didn't say I couldn't. Why aren't you with Frank? I've given you the perfect conditions. And if you had a good lovemaking with Frank, you wouldn't be here, would you? I'm not making love to Caroline anymore. You used to like it. That was when I didn't see Frank in my head. It ruined everything for me. I didn't say you could do it. You didn't say I couldn't, and it seems to me that you like it. Why are you here, Caroline? You didn't want me to forget Holly. You were just looking for an excuse to divorce me and try yourself with guys like Frank. Why not be honest? We don't have to lie to each other anymore. We're done. She grabbed his hips and turned him around, and he left the pot on the stove and turned to face her, at least to the top of her head. He picked her up, carried her into the bedroom, and threw her on the bed. What are you going to do, mister? I don't want to do this anymore. She tried to roll over and crawl to the edge of the bed, but he grabbed her skirt and pulled until it tore. Don't do that, you bastard. He pulled her to him and kissed her. You know you've hurt me very badly. I didn't think anyone could hurt me like that after Holly, but you did it. I know that, Dan. I don't have any excuses except that I was in so much pain that I wasn't thinking straight. But I'll try to make it up to you. I will be the best wife. He grinned at me. You know it's not going to be easy for you. She punched him in the ribs. Bastard. Then the smile disappeared from her face, and she turned and pressed her ass against his groin with a spoon. I have to confess to you. I don't want this, Dan, but I think I have to if we're going to live the rest of our lives. What? You haven't dated Frank anymore, have you? No, I haven't met, but it's still about Frank. He was 12 inches tall and you didn't want me to have an inferiority complex? No, but you were almost right when you said I wanted to use him, and you used Holly as an excuse. She felt him tense up and clung to him tighter. He's damn good looking, and the other girls in the office were talking about how good he was, which I am. Sometimes I thought about him, just wondering, how it will be. I would never do that, I assure you, but women fantasize too. And when I decided to leave you and decided that I was using someone just to mess with your head, he was the first and only one I thought of. He said he's been thinking about me for a long time too. You have to understand. Before that, I was sleeping with a man who was talking about another woman. She turned to face him and he saw tears in her eyes. I feel like such a cheater, but I guess I was a cheater with him. The only thing I can say is that it will never happen again. As long as I have you, I will never need him or any other man. Do you believe me? Can you forgive me for wanting him so much? Damn it. In a way, I regret hearing that. It makes it even worse. But since we're going to admit it, I have to tell you that when I was talking to Holly, it was damn hard for me not to throw her on the booth table. I'm not in love with her anymore. If she came in tears and said she was breaking up with Bill and asked me to take her somewhere, to be honest, I can't say what I would have done. You know that I love you, but I'm just a human being. And you too. He kissed her again and whispered in her ear. So if that little redhead who works in the office next to you ever comes to me again, like at that office party last June, you'll understand if I take her to one of the bedrooms and... He stopped talking because she was holding his balls in her small hands and squeezing hard. Then she started rolling them like balls and it hurt. Just play with her, and I swear to God you'll wake up one morning without them. Is everything clear? Transparent. I kind of love them, so I guess I'll have to give up the redhead. He kissed her again. He would never tell her about it, but he compared the kiss and lips to Holly's lips. No one would ever be in Holly's league, but Caroline was the woman he loved. She snuggled up to him and said, I really never thought this would happen. I thought you were so in love with her that we could never be together again. I will never be able to thank you enough for coming back to me. The only thing I can do is love you forever. My soul needs it.